Welcome to Solutions for Mental Wellness. On today's podcast, we have John Beck. John is a licensed professional counselor working here in Greenville, South Carolina, and he also is the executive director for Recovery, Wellness, and Retreats. John, thank you for coming on our podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Susan. Thank you.
So, John, recently we had Zach Miller on the show, and as you know, he's a licensed marriage and family therapist, and he gave us ways to identify what addiction looks like and also how to create support when one realizes, or if a family member realizes that there is a problem with addiction. And so today I wonder if we can talk about the role guilt and shame plays in addiction and addiction recovery.
Great question. In my experience, guilt, a lot of times people don't know the difference between guilt and shame. They sound like the same thing, but what I oftentimes point out to my clients is if they were the same thing, they would be the same word.
Yes.
But guilt and shame are different. And one thing that I learned in my years of experience is that guilt is something that we feel when we tend to break a rule. Like, for instance, we know that when we're traveling down the highway, if it says 65 and I'm doing 85, I'm breaking a rule. I'm breaking an established rule. So when I get pulled over, then what I feel is guilt for breaking that particular rule. But shame is different. Shame is deeper. Shame affects what a lot of times people would call the soul of a person. It affects their self-concept, their self-confidence. Okay?
Their identity.
It affects their identity. Okay. Guilt says I did something wrong. Shame says I am something wrong.
Wow, that's powerful. So when someone is in active addiction, then their narrative about themselves isn't, I had one too many to drink. I feel guilty about that. It's like I'm a failure because I've had too much to drink.
Exactly. It begins to define them as a person. It defines them in their mind. It affects their worldview. It affects their perception of how other people see them. If they begin to define themselves as being worthless, or define themselves as being helpless or hopeless. And so that is the area that shame lives in.
And shame sounds like it's isolating.
It is. Shame is very isolating because you identify that as part of your identity, then you tend to feel that no one else understands on your level what you're going through.
You're not worthy to be with other people.
Exactly.
You're not good enough to have friendships and relationships.
Exactly.
And connection is so important when we realize we have an addiction, is finding healthy connections. And so can you speak a little bit about how connection might be an antidote to shame?
It definitely can, because a lot of times when I'm counseling someone and we're talking about being able to move past shame, what I tell them is learning to love themselves is the antidote.
Yes.
The thing about it is you have been conditioned either by your circumstance or by history that this is who I am. So you have to prove to yourself that you are not what you have believed you were because of your addiction or because of your past or because of your trauma. And so connection with people is key because we tend to live in our own head.
And the people around us mirror. Like if we have that self-assessment, then in relationship, we might be acting it out. But if we start changing how we view ourselves, then the people in our lives might reflect that back to us. Is that what you mean?
Exactly. The thing about it is that when we are associating with other people, then we begin to see a different perspective. Sometimes that perspective is positive, sometimes that perspective is negative. But one of the assignments that I often give my clients is if you're struggling with guilt or shame, I will tell them I need for you to make a list of at least 5 things that are good about yourself. But if you can't think of 5 things, I want for you to ask people around you
That's a
what
wonderful
they like
intervention.
or love
Yeah.
about you. Even if you don't believe it yourself, even if you're struggling to believe it, I want you to ask the people that are closest to you what they love and like about you, and we'll process that in session.
That's a really good intervention. So, what have been some of the benefits that you've seen come from that?
One of the benefits that I've noticed is people that are struggling with shame are oftentimes surprised and conflicted at the same time. They're surprised that someone else sees them completely different than they see themselves. And then they have that internal conflict because in their mind, there's a loop that says, I'm no good. My situation is hopeless. But then I have this contradicting thought. I have this contradicting message that's coming from someone else that says, you are somebody. I do believe in you. You can change. And so you begin to challenge that self-defeating belief.
And that's where choice comes in, because one of the things that we understand about addiction is that the deeper into addiction or the greater the impact of using a substance or going through a behavioral process is that our choices get taken away from us. And we choose, and the choices we make in addiction narrows our choices and opportunities. And so by understanding that someone else may see us differently, then we have a choice to believe something different than what shame tries to tell us.
This is true. One thing that I tell individuals when it comes to choice and addiction is that addiction is a disease. It has been scientifically proven that addiction is a disease, but it is still a choice to reach out, a choice to allow individuals to help you, a choice to realize and admit that there is a problem and want that help. And allow individuals to help to steer you in a different path, even when you're fighting against your own brain because of the addiction.
And it sounds like with the intervention you were talking about using in your practice, that also opens up the door to build a healthy support system.
Yes, it does. A healthy support system is so key in an individual entering recovery. What I oftentimes explain to individuals is there's a difference between sobriety and recovery. Sobriety is a choice. Okay, anybody can choose to abstain from substances or behavior for a period of time, but recovery is a change of mindset. It is a change of perception. Recovery is a lifestyle. When you go into recovery, it is a change of everything, not just about what you're physically doing or not doing, but how you're thinking and how you see the world.
Yeah. And that lifestyle includes changing the people you hang out with, the places you hang out, the things that you do. What are some other things that change as a function of how we view ourselves?
Well, one thing that I tell my clients is in recovery, you have to figure out what 3 things. I give them a number. I try to give them something that's quantifiable. Yes, I have to give them something quantifiable. And I say in early recovery, find 3 things that you know are effective in helping you to stay focused on your recovery, help you to stay focused on being sober one more day. And for some people, that is repairing their relationships with their families. For some people, it is repairing their relationship with their employer. Sometimes some people find their identities in their jobs. For some people, it is AA or NA meetings. Finding what those 3 things are that can help you to stay focused can be a lifeline for you when you're having those moments of weakness.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about the difference between sobriety and recovery, because that is key. Just because one is not consuming the substance does not mean that the substance isn't ruling their life.
That is true. That is true. See, the thing about it is that addiction is a brain disease. Okay. And once your brain has become addicted to a particular behavior or a particular substance, then it is going to crave that particular substance or that particular behavior.
More of it.
Yes, it's going to want that more and more. And because of that, one of the things that you have to understand is there has to be more than just the thought of stopping. Okay, there has to be some physical action that takes place, whether it be changing your environment, changing your friends. What you're going to begin to do is you're going to begin to realize that it's a collection of things that you have to do on a regular basis to maintain your recovery and your sobriety. A lot of times individuals will hear the term. I've heard the term, in my experience of a dry drunk. All
Yes.
right. Or a dry addict. And what that simply means is someone that's choosing to be sober, but their mind and their perception never changed. They still behave as if they are still struggling with the addiction.
Yeah.
So their
they're
habits
living in
didn't
that
change.
shame.
Yes, they're living in
their
that.
narrative hasn't changed about who they are.
There you go. There you go. And it affects how they see themselves, and it affects how they behave. Oftentimes when people are just sober, or what we call white knuckling it, just trying to stay away from the substance but not change their worldview and their perception, then life is still dull. They're still struggling with depression on several fronts. Okay, they're still struggling with helplessness and hopelessness because they're just choosing not to participate or to engage in that activity, but their mind has not changed.
One of the things that in working with families that I see a lot of is that children and partners often say, I actually like my parent or my partner better when they're drinking because at least I know who they are, and sometimes they can be fun. And that really is troubling because for someone who is only focusing on sobriety, who are white knuckling it through it, their life is really no better than when they are in their addiction. And actually their relationships may be better when they're in active addiction. So John, what is going to help someone get from sobriety into recovery?
It starts with an internal decision. I tell all of my clients, regardless of what they're coming to see me for, change starts from within.
Yes.
It is an internal decision that you come to within yourself where you say, the course of my life, what I am dealing with on a daily basis, how I see myself, how I see the world, there is something wrong with it. What I am doing to numb or to escape my life, there is something wrong with it. And that is the beginning of change. And transitioning from just the choice of sobriety into recovery, it begins with that decision, that internal decision for change, admitting that there's a problem, allowing individuals to help them, and beginning to prove to themselves through daily actions that they are not what they believed for so long that they were. It is proving to themselves that they are not what they believed that they were.
Heritage Institute is very pleased to announce that they have a partner. And Bridge City Coffee has come along beside of us to help make these podcasts happen. And not only have they decided to partner with us, but through this partnership, we've discovered that they have a location near each of our upstate offices. So there's 3 in Greenville, 1 in Travelers Rest, 1 in Greenville, actually 2 in Greenville. So if you're in our area, we'd love for you to stop by. Their vision is pretty simple. They want to build value and hope in people through coffee. And so as is with Heritage, we value the people we serve. Bridge City Coffee values the people that they serve. So stop by and check them out. So it goes back to that intrinsic idea about knowing who they are, valuing who they are, loving who they are, and then really from there pulling into saying, I am worthy to live in this world. I can take up space. And so when someone values themselves it sounds like that is going to be a key component to moving from sobriety to recovery. What are some barriers that keep people either in sobriety or in this place of making the choice? I want to come out. I want my life to change, but actually not changing or being able to get over that hump, because it is a mountain. Often I've heard it described as it's like you have two arms tied behind your back and you're pushing a boulder up the hill with your nose. And that metaphor was huge for me to help understand what the person was going through. And that is an impossible task. And so many people in addiction or who are trying to be sober can feel so overwhelmed. So what are some barriers that people have that maybe as therapists or as family or as friends, we need to bring up?
I would say that the perception of their loved ones can be a barrier for them.
Okay.
Struggling with
So what they think their family or loved ones thinks about them.
Yes,
Okay.
and what they think their families and loved ones thinks about them, and then also, to be completely honest, sometimes what their family and friends actually think about them, because a lot of times what we fail to realize is what addiction does is it not just wreaks havoc on the individual, but it wreaks havoc on the relationships in their lives. And so it's not just about the individual in recovery forgiving themselves. It is about a period of forgiveness for all of the loved ones, being able to heal and move past the damage that the addiction has done.
Yes.
You know, it's important to realize if you have a loved one or a family member that's struggling with addiction, it is the addiction itself that they're struggling with within their mind, and not the person that you love, not the person that you knew. And when a person is in early recovery, one of the barriers is that fear of never being forgiven. That fear of things never being the same again, that fear of never being able to make a strong enough amends in order to regain that relationship.
So how do you help someone overcome that fear? Because fear is huge. Most people who struggle with addiction already have fears for many different reasons. And so how can you help someone overcome that fear of, oh, I can't be forgiven because I've stolen or I've lied or I've manipulated? How can someone overcome that?
Yeah, it is a process. That's what I tell people. Oftentimes I was asked when I worked at the hospital, well, John, how long will it take for my loved one to forgive me and let what I did go now that I've changed my life? And I would be honest with them and I would say, I don't know how long that would take. I said, but a pattern of consistent changed behavior goes a long way towards helping people to rebuild trust.
Yes.
It goes a long way towards helping individuals to see that the addiction is no longer in control of you, but you are in control of the addiction. And so those individuals feel safe allowing their guard to be let down, allowing themselves to be vulnerable with you again, while you in turn are also being honest and vulnerable with yourself and with them.
Honesty is such a key component to overcoming addiction. And one of the things that Zach mentioned in the session that he was on in our podcast was that honest self-assessment. And then it sounds like that whether someone uses the 12-step model or an eclectic model for overcoming addiction, that there has to be a regular self-evaluation that the person does just to see this is where I am now. This is who I am now. I'm not who I once was. And I might not yet be who I want to be, but I'm making progress. How important is it to note the small successes when someone is moving from active addiction to sobriety?
I'm so glad you said that, because That is one of the key things that I tell individuals in early recovery. You have to learn to celebrate small victories because you will have mountains to climb. You will have temptations. You will have arguments with your family. You will have people that are suspicious about you. And so as you navigate your way through early recovery and change and transition from sobriety to a lifestyle of recovery, when you have your first month of sobriety, celebrate that. When you're able to tell that old friend that you used to party with that, no, I can't do that anymore. That's not who I am. When you're able to admit to your coworkers that I'm sober now. So if we go and enjoy ourselves, then I won't be partaking in any alcohol. Or even if you turn it down altogether, that is a victory. That is a victory. And celebrating those small victories is what you use in your dark moments.
Yes.
You remind yourself.
Recognize the change.
There you go. I was able to say no. I was able to change the way that I saw my situation, and I no longer saw myself as weak, but I saw the courage that it took for me to speak up for myself and to advocate for myself. I realized that it was important for me to surround myself with individuals that supported my decision for recovery rather than hiding my recovery from people.
It sounds like there's a lot of communication changes that need to happen as well. The communication we have with ourselves, the communication we have with others, and then what else in one's communication do we need to focus on when we're moving from active addiction to sobriety?
One of the things that I run into a lot when it comes to communication, and I'm glad that you mentioned communication with ourselves, is because a lot of individuals, when they're going from sobriety into a lifestyle of recovery, is they struggle with the issue of control. Okay, the reality that there is something that is a part of me that if I submit to it, it takes control of me, and it makes you feel weak. And what I try to help them to understand is we have to communicate differently to ourselves. Yeah. We have to see our situation differently, because if we continue to see ourselves as weak because this is a part of us, then we begin to feel like our situation is helpless, and that voice of addiction begins to speak to us and say, well, what's the point?
Yeah, it's like we're climbing uphill in a mudslide and we tell ourselves we're not making any progress. And then that shame comes in. Well, there's something wrong with me. I'm not strong enough. I'm not good enough. When actually the focus becomes, no, this is a mudslide. We can't make any progress here. We have to shift where we are to go to the top of the mountain that we want to get to. Exactly.
What I often give this example to individuals. If you're struggling with control, I use that as an example. If you're struggling with control and you're struggling with feeling as though you're weak because of your addiction, then I ask them a simple question. If you had a peanut allergy, would you be ashamed of it? Would you be ashamed of a peanut allergy?
No.
You would just
I would be telling everybody.
There you go. You would simply modify your life, because you know that if any kind of peanut oil or anything related to peanuts gets in your system, you're going to have an allergic reaction that could be lethal or fatal. And I said, try to begin to change your perception of your addiction as a medical condition, which it is, rather than a weakness of your character.
So, John, you and I have talked a lot today about moving from addiction to sobriety to beginning the recovery process. Our producer, Diana Valerie, has been off screen, and so she's going to have some question and answers for us now.
Sure.
Okay, here we go. We're going to start with when you were talking about the dry drunk. As a therapist, where do you begin to understand, how do you help somebody who's a dry drunk understand where their power is to make the choice? Because all of these things that you're saying is about choice, right? People who are really at the lowest point in their life, they don't know that they can make the choice. They don't think they can make the choice. Well, when you have an addict that hasn't made the choice to get help and they think that they can't make the choice, what do you say to them or the family member to help them figure out, hey, you can make, what do? You help them find their power? What is it?
Well, what I normally do is I just start with a simple question. Do you like where your life is right now? And based on that answer, I build upon it.
That starts the client thinking.
It starts the client thinking. Do you like where your life is right now? And typically they'll say, no, my life is terrible. Well, what is it about your life that's so terrible? And then they'll get into the underlying reasons why they're using or why they're drinking. And then that's when I try to insert some hope that your life does not have to remain the way it is if you allow individuals to help you to see it from a different perspective. I know you can't see it right now. Everything seems dark, and the only escape you find is either through a substance or through alcohol. But if you allow us to show you something different, just allow us a small crack of light into that darkness with you, then we can help you to see a different way to deal with what's making your life so hard.
Okay, so at the very beginning of the segment, we talked about loving yourself. And coming from a faith-based background, maybe it's my generation, it is not an easy thing for Christian community to swallow. So like there used to be a song, Jesus, Others, and You is at the last, right? So what do you do? How do you speak into the Christian narrative or the Christian community? Because I don't think we get the same thing from Christian counseling all the time about accepting and loving yourself first. Like, where do you find that biblically?
Do you mind if I?
Sure.
Okay, so one of the things, and this is newer to me, like within the past 3 years maybe, I was studying and Jesus was being manipulated by the Pharisees and Sadducees. They were trying to trip him up because, number one, they didn't believe who he was. Number two, they wanted to embarrass and bring shame to him. And so they asked him the question, to sum up the law. And then what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus thought for a moment and he said, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor, and this is where I love prepositional phrases, as yourself. And so for me, that was a whole shift in my thinking as a believer, as a Christian, that I have a responsibility to love and care for myself. And so there's another passage in Scripture that talks about our bodies being the temple of Christ. And that's where the Holy Spirit dwells. And so because of that, then I have a responsibility to love and to care for myself. And that's what I share with my clients, is that, you have as a believer, you have a responsibility to love the creation of the Creator, your God, and then to care for it because your Heavenly Father cares for you. And from that, then you can fill the cups of others. John, I want to thank you so much for coming to Solutions for Mental Wellness to talk about moving from addiction into sobriety and recovery.
Thank you so very much for having me.
In our next episode, I want us to spend more time talking about recovery. Will you hang around for that?
Sure.